Shippy, what do you think of Update 35? This video is going to tell you the 5 biggest things coming to ESO Update 35 Lost Depths DLC. It's going to launch August 22nd on PC and September 6th on consoles. Welcome back, it's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com. The goal of this video is to give you a broad overview of the most important changes so you'll be prepared when the patch launches to adjust your current build. By the end of this video, if you got something out of it, hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Not a nasty one for once. Let's get started with the number 1 change you should be aware of, and that's damage over times and heal over times adjustment. And it's the most complex and hard to understand, but let me try to Barney Deltia explain this for you. Before we get started with damage over time changes, why are these so impactful in the Elder Scrolls Online? And why are dots used so frequently in high-end DPS builds? Typically, dots outperform your main spammable ability, meaning you have one action to take that usually results in a 1-second global cooldown. You want to take the action that produces the most damage, which is typically a hard-hitting, short-duration, 10-second damage over time. Think Unstable Wall, think Mystic Orbs, and a bunch of others. You'll only use your main spammable as a filler when all of your dots are quote-unquote up, and then go back to reapplying those dots. The best players sometimes run no main spammable, just damage over times, and execute. Now to the changes. The first iteration of the PTS was on July 11th, had the community in uproar, shocker, when the majority of the damage over time abilities were changed to 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds and applied damage every 2 seconds rather than every 1. During this phase of testing, you ended up with many damage over times outperforming your main spammable, but with double the duration. You ended up with an incredibly lackluster combat experience resulting in 9 to 10 main spammables before applying 4 to 5 dots, and rinse and repeat. Thankfully, that change was reverted on July 25th, and here's what's most likely going to go live. Damage and healing over time abilities standards are now better differentiated based on the type of ability they are. These changes mainly target area of effect based abilities to increase their tick rates and reduce their duration. So now you have 2 different types of damage over time effects. One, sticky, which remain on the target. Those will be the 20-second duration, 2-second frequency. You also have damage over time effects that are static, and those will be back to either 10, 12, or 15 seconds depending on the source. So just reading this, it's really hard to parse out what's 20 seconds, what's 10, what's in between, because static, sticky, it's just ESO jargon again. But let me try to explain this a little bit simpler. What this essentially does is homogenize the dots. So the TLDR is 1 or more class abilities will be your standard damage over time, 10 second, 12, or 15. Here's some brief examples. Dragon Knight using Eruption, Necromancer, Boneyard, Nightblade Twisting Path, Sorcerer Lightning Flood, Templar Blazing Spear, and Lord Warden Winter's Revenge. Then you have some dots that will be adjusted to the lackluster 20-second long, 2-second tick for damage. Dragon Knight, Searing Strike, and Fiery Breath, including both morphs. Necromancer, Skeletal Mage, and Shocking Siphon. Nightblade, Darkshade, and Cripple. Sorcerer, both of the pets, Summon Volatile Familiar, and Summon Twilight Tormentor. Templar, Solar Barrage, Ritual Retribution, and Sunfire. And the Lord Warden, Swarm. Note that the 2 skills which will most likely be used on Magicka and or Stamina builds, Mystic Orbs and Razor Caltrops, remain at 10 seconds, with damage being applied every 1 second, so they're a great replacement or filler skills, and additional options available if you're struggling with the 20-second dots or you're not getting the damage you're used to. So the summary on the dots, just consider it's going to be more homogenized. You're going to have typically an in-class ability that's going to be your main dot, your heavy hitter. It's going to be typically 10 seconds, but might be 12 or 15. Then you're going to have a couple dots when you log in. You're going to be like, huh, that's weird. It's going to be 20 seconds, but just realize the frequency is 2 seconds it applies damage, so a little bit lackluster, but also a bit easier to maintain these with less frequent bar swaps needed. You'll pair your high class damage over time with maybe a weapon skill line in to fill in the damage, or an outside skill in like Mystic Orb or Razor Caltrops. Try finding the highest damage dealing dot with the shortest duration so they can be cast more frequently and thus outperform your main spammable, giving you more damage. Also realize heals over time were adjusted initially similar to damage over times, then adjusted back on July 25th. So healers, don't panic. It should be largely the same same, but you're experiencing update 34 for better or for worse. So most likely your builds are going to maybe have a little bit less damage, but they're probably going to be a little bit easier to maintain, especially if you're going to use those 20-second dots. We're going to continue to test solo, arena, 4-player, dungeons, and trials and try to get this sorted out, because the meta is going to keep on shifting because there's a lot of drastic changes, so it'll take a while to actually figure out what's working and why it's so effective. But don't click off this video. There's a lot more important things to go, and let's move on to number 2, and that's light and heavy attacks. Light and heavy attacks. So let me answer light attack weaving. What is it, and why is it so important in Elder Scrolls Online? Light attack weaving has been in the game since launch. No, it's not a hack, so just stop leaving me comments about it. And many people don't understand it. Essentially, your skills are on a 1-second global cooldown, and your light attack is on a separate 1-second global cooldown. Thus, you get free damage pairing or weaving those 2 global cooldowns, an ability and a light attack, as close together as possible, like a heartbeat. The syncing them up closer and closer and closer. And that's how you get and squeeze every ounce of damage out of a DPS character, both in PvE and PvP. And thus, apparently, ZOS wants to kind of lower the need, requirement, and effort for light attack weaving and try to close the gap between the beginner player and the super advanced. Don't shoot the messenger here. This is what they're doing. July 11th was the first iteration of light and heavy attack changes, which would now, quote, deal a flat amount of damage rather than scaling with your highest offensive stat. And again, as you can imagine, another uproar with the community, and you guessed it, they changed it back. Also, an important note before we move on, the final hit from Restoration and Lightning Stabs can now be dodged once again, to ensure there is better counterplay at denying an opponent resources in the stronger portion of the attack. More of a PvP thing, because Lightning and Restoration Staff still primarily work the same in PvE. August 1st, we saw the adjustment of light and heavy attacks back to their current state and what's most likely to go live. Light and heavy attacks once again scale with your highest offensive stat rather than dealing a flat amount of damage. Reduce the damage light attacks do by approximately 26% compared to what's on the live server to ease back on their overall impact while retaining their importance in rotation. So I tested these changes on the live and PTS with my good old Templar, which also received massive changes. In parse number 1, using the same gear, the same character, same PC and everything, I used a 3 million solo parse dummy to simulate an average player doing a dungeon or an overland world boss. My light attacks came in at my second damage source with 5,676 DPS. 11.6% of my overall DPS. Meanwhile, on the PTS, I had 5.6% of my overall DPS with 2,666 DPS. Obviously, this wasn't 26%. There are many factors to this parse excluding light attack, and that could be unrelated. TLDR here with light and heavy attacks. They're still really good to use. If you can use light attack weaving, it's still going to be one of the best ways to increase your overall DPS, but it won't be so detrimental if you're not God's gift at parsing and doing them almost simultaneously and syncing them up. Eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and learn how to parse, kids. But Deltia, what about medium weaving? I heard that's going to be a thing. Should we know about this and be concerned? Well, I'm glad you asked. That's number 3 on the list. Have I mentioned there was an uproar on the forums? Shocker, it's another one. And that's number 3 on our list, an odd move, and that's the change to Empower buff. The pre-update 35 Empower buff did the following. Increases the damage of your light, medium, and heavy attacks by 40%. We can understand why this is so sought after because of the huge impact it has on your DPS and everyone's overall. Therefore, it's a hugely important buff, both solo and group, and very sought after either through skills or abilities. The change went to, quote, this buff now increases your damage against monsters with heavy attacks by 80%. Rather than your damage done with light and heavy attacks by 1800 from PTS version 8.1.0, or 40% from the live server. Now, if you read that line carefully, it says heavy attacks, not fully charged heavy attacks, meaning the new meta would be medium weaving, which is more complex and harder to learn than light attack weaving. Medium weaving essentially is holding down your trigger or your mouse slightly longer than just pressing a light attack to register a quote-unquote heavy or a medium, not a fully charged. The best example of this is Dizzying Swing. You set someone off balance with the ability in PvP. While the ability or the animation is going, essentially what you're doing is holding your light attack button or trigger. As soon as the ability fires off, you wait a split second and release that, which registers a medium or a heavy, knocking down and stunning your opponent, but it doesn't take nearly the time as a fully charged heavy attack. Thankfully, the quote-unquote medium change, or this change above, is not going to go live. The developers have confirmed this will be changed. The Empower buff will be changed to only fully charged heavy attacks. So not freaking out here, medium weaving won't be the new norm. The developers did for the most part listen to the community on most of these changes, but not all, to be fair. So are you seeing a trend here? The TLDR is the average player might lose a little bit in DPS, but will be a little bit simpler and easier to play the game. It will still feel like Elder Scrolls Online. It will still have a challenge. It will still be the combat that you know and love. Just some slight adjustments. The confusing part has been so far that you've had massive changes and then huge reversions, and it's hard to parse out what's actually going to go live. But that's why you have me. And that brings us to our fourth change, and that's boss health. On August 8th, we got a small note adjusting boss health. Dungeons, quote, reduce the health of all bosses in veteran dungeons. Trials, reduce the health of all bosses, champions, and bannermen in veteran difficulty. In a separate post later, outside of the patch notes by Gina Bruno, quote, the health changes vary slightly for each boss, so it's not simply a flat numerical or percentage change. We can at least confirm the change only affects dungeons and trial bosses, not arenas. So don't expect every boss to have a 5% health reduction or some flat number, but this will go live, you will see reduction, and it will vary, some drastically, some not so drastically. And when you're actually playing the content, it feels very similar in time to kill, difficulty, and mechanics as it currently does of making this video in update 34. On that note, it's worth mentioning classes have similar amounts of damage due to homogenizations of dots and main spammables, so the gaps in class identity is shrinking. It's becoming less and less class identity and more fancy, flashy animations than it is. This class is really, really unique because it has this main spammable. So for the average player, along with the non-reliance on light attack weaving, you need to make a choice on what your main will be for the upcoming patch. So something to factor into this decision is hard-hitting executes will be very useful, especially if they come from your class kit like the Templar Radiant Oppression and Nightblade's Killer's Blade. The quicker you can get to execute, the harder your execute hits, the greater advantage in general a class can have. So keep that in mind when you're making your decision what you want to play next class. Moving on to our last one, and that's our main spammable options. They have changed, and you're not going to be pigeonholed in just using one thing. Let me explain. Number 5, we have a lot to discuss in terms of main spammable attacks. You'll have some freedom in picking a variety of main spammables, some of which seem quite odd, but actually perform equal to or better than in-class main spammables. Rapid Strikes for dual wield, for instance, is performing exceptionally well with an updated animation and adjustment overall damage makes it a great option for nearly all melee stamina builds, including my beloved Templar Rip Jabs. Now the goofy one that I've been using for a bit with the high tooltip, AoE damage, and great passives to boost is Silver Shards from the Fighter's Guild. The tooltip will be nearly as high, if not much higher, than most in-class main spammables. Don't believe me? Check for yourself. The added advantage of this ability is its range. It's Fighter's Guild, so merely slotting it will increase your weapon and spell damage via the passive in the skill line, and it's also AoE, with similar to a little bit higher stamina cost in comparison to most stamina builds main spammables. You'll also have some other options that you can get from the Psijic Order Imbue weapon with both morphs. One being an elemental weapon, great for magic users that light attack weave and can work at melee or range, or crushing weapon, the stamina version also a decent choice if you don't want to use Silver Shard or Rapid Strikes, but I highly recommend considering Silver Shard or Rapid Strikes based on its current performance. The meta has been shifting more and more towards stamina for a change because of the gear options, main spammable choices, and flexibility in builds. Moreover, even the standard arena weapon gear setup may be off meta now, changing to a back bar Pillars of Nirn 5-piece, a front bar War of the Depths, a monster helm, and a mythic, basically making kind of what I use in PvP builds really good in PvE, but that will be another video. You still have some main spammable options in your class if you want want that identity. Dragonite will still have Whip. Lord Warden will still have the most annoying sounding main spammable of all time in a video game, Cutting Dive. Nightblades can slot Concealed Weapon just for the buff and use something else like Silver Shards. Templars, pick your poison here if you still want to use jabs or an outside skill line. Sorks, crystal weapons, and sea frags are still good options. And Necromancers really have a ton of options, and you have a God mode self-heal, Scythe. Though it doesn't do as much damage as other main spambles, but it's kind of like the new jabs. It heals, hits decently hard, it's AoE in a nice cone. It's a great option in PvE and PvP, especially if you want survivability. Now, I'm going to play around with these main spambles' actual content when this launches live, so dungeons, arena, trials, and update my builds based on effectiveness, ease of access, and DPS performance. But you're not pigeonholed into using one main spammable. You have a lot of options, and some seem odd, but trust me on this, the meta is shifting, and we will figure this out once we get in game, because there's so many changes to actually see and perform. You've made it this far into the video. Praise Talos! There's a million more things to cover, to be honest with you, but we have a full write-up on Deltiasgaming.com where we break it down by gear, class, overall general combat changes, and more. Link in the description below. Also, if you found this video helpful or useful, make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. It really does help out. I'll be streaming this content live on August 22nd, so make sure to tune in to me at twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming. Until next time, thanks for watching.